All right. Well, hey, good evening, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be moving into the prophetic portion of the book of Daniel tonight, and that'll be kind of the topic of our study going forward here until we finish the book. I had put a note in the chat box. If you had not had a chance to get the notes for tonight, I'm going to recopy those and paste them right now. It's at a link on our website. You've got the link in the chat box now. And it's labeled under chapter 7, although technically we're kind of combining some of chapter 2 with chapter 7, but it's labeled under chapter 7. That's where you'll find the notes for tonight and for next week. It's just 10 pages total. We'll cover half tonight and half next week. So that should be there. If you have any problems, just let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And then obviously if you've got your notes, you can kind of have those ready to go with you. Let me get set up, and then I'll make sure that you guys can see everything. Can you guys see the screen okay? Anybody?
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so tonight, like I said, we're going to start the prophetic portion of the book of Daniel. And we want to start with, many times you look at the dream of Daniel chapter 2, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and you think that's kind of separate and distinct from other things in the book. I actually think chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and chapter 7, Daniel's dream and visions, they actually go together. And I think they actually describe the same period of time. It's what Jesus terms the times of the Gentiles in Luke 21. The difference between the dreams, and this is what we're going to look at tonight, is simply a difference of perspective of the same time period. And so Luke 21:24, Jesus, basically in the middle of the Olivet Discourse, Luke's version of the Olivet Discourse, he's describing how when Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, but he makes this kind of subtle comment coming out of that in verse 24. He says, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations," as speaking of the Jews. "And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." And I think when Jesus uses that phrase, times of the Gentiles, he's referring to what we have recorded in dreams in Daniel 2 and Daniel chapter 7. And what it is, again, and remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we kind of looked at briefly when we were studying through the narrative portions. But Nebuchadnezzar's dream is basically describing a time of Gentile rule over Jerusalem and the world. And we're going to see that Daniel's dream and visions in chapter 7 is a description of the same things. It's a description of Gentile rule, different Gentile nations, and who's going to rule during this times of the Gentiles. And so that's what we're going to look at tonight. Now, Israel may be a nation now. Some may say, well, wait a minute, Israel's already a nation now, but their leader is not ruling over the world, right? This is only going to happen during the kingdom of heaven reign when Messiah comes, Jesus Christ comes back, and he'll be ruling over the world. So Gentiles are currently ruling over the world. We are in the times of the Gentiles as we speak. And so let's kind of just provide a couple of introductory comments tonight as we kind of get into chapters 2 and 7. So number one, due to Israel's failure in keeping their end of the Mosaic covenant, they had been sent into exile. Okay, this is why Daniel, again, is where he's at. It's because of their failure to keep their end of the Mosaic covenant. And so in fulfillment of prophecy, the people of Israel would face many difficult days of suffering. Now, this was predicted in the Old Testament. In fact, if you go back to, as a review, Deuteronomy 28:15, it says specifically, after following, I think it was 14 verses of blessings on obedience, there were going to be some problems with disobedience. And so in verse 15 it says, "But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you." And you could start reading through those, but specifically look down at verses 36 and 37 in Deuteronomy 28. "The Lord will bring you and the king whom you set over you to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, and you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations where the Lord will drive you. And so we see that this is a prophesied promise that if they did not keep their end of the Mosaic covenant, they weren't obeying the Lord in the Mosaic covenant, one of the consequences would be exile or removal from the land. That would be part of their discipline. We also see in Deuteronomy 31, 16, we can kind of read more about this. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners of the land, where they go to be among them, and they will forsake me and break my covenant, which I have made it with them. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods. Verse 19, now therefore, write down this song for yourselves and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel, when I have brought them to the land flowing with milk and honey, of which I swore to their fathers, and they have eaten and filled themselves and grown fat. Then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will provoke me and break my covenant. And then it shall be, when many evils and troubles have come upon them, that this song will testify against them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten in the mouths of their descendants. For I know the inclination of their behavior today, even before I have brought them to the land of which I swore to give them. And so you see that God said that there would be consequences. He predicted that they would turn from the Mosaic covenant and disobey him. And so Daniel is in exile right now due to Israel's failure of keeping their Mosaic covenant. In the short term, the nation of Judah, of which Daniel was a part, would face 70 years of captivity in Babylon. In the long term, though, and this is where Daniel 2 and 7 come into play, multiple Gentile nations would rule the earth, and thus over Israel, until God reestablishes them in their own promised land with their eternal king. And this is, again, as I said earlier, it's not going to happen until Jesus returns to reign as king during the millennial kingdom, or the kingdom of heaven on earth. And so we're talking big picture here. We're talking God's discipline on the nation of Israel. Obviously, we saw it in the short term, the 70 years of captivity. They returned. But even though they returned and rebuilt Jerusalem under Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and Ezra, they were still ultimately under Gentile rule, global rule, if you will. And that's still true today. Okay, so we're in the times of the Gentiles, and that's what Daniel 7 actually gives us a lot more detail on, that final phase of the kingdom that will be in place when the Antichrist is on earth, ruling in that one world government. So we'll kind of build our way up there, but that's where we're going. So despite Israel's failures, and in God's perfect time frame, he will establish Israel permanently in the promised land, just as he promised in his unconditional covenants to Israel. And again, you remember those covenants, Genesis 12, 1 through 3 being the big daddy of all the covenants. That's the Abrahamic covenant, 3 provisions in that Abrahamic covenant: land, seed, and blessing. And then you've got land, seed, and blessing. You've got 3 more covenants that provide even more details on those provisions. You've got the land covenant, you've got the Davidic covenant, speaking of the seed, and then you've got the new covenant detailing the blessings of the Abrahamic covenant, the provisions. And so God's going to do that. Those are unconditional. He is going to execute those promises to the nation of Israel. At some point, it's going to be during the millennial kingdom when all of them will be fulfilled. Now, as we're going to see, some of Daniel's prophecies, and this is kind of just an introduction to the prophecy section of Daniel, that some of Daniel's prophecies concerning Israel were near fulfillments, while others still remain to be fulfilled in the distant future, what we would call far fulfillments. And so during the waiting time for the far prophecies to be fulfilled, Israel could remain persuaded of God's faithfulness and protection of them in the short term. So God would give them things that they could see that were fulfilled prophecy, and then he would give them farther prophecy that was further out. And the fulfillment of the shorter term prophecy was designed to give them confidence that the longer term prophecy would also be fulfilled. And so oftentimes prophecy in the Bible is often given with either a near or far future fulfillment. And sometimes it's given as both near and far. We would call that dual fulfillment. We talk about this passage some during the Christmas season, but a great example of near and far fulfillment, or this dual fulfillment, is Isaiah 7:14, Matthew 1:23. Obviously, we tend to focus on the far fulfillment. Isaiah is written in about 700 BC-ish. And we identify 7:14, the prediction of the virgin birth, as applying to the birth of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And so did the Jews. They viewed that as a far fulfillment. But when you look at the context of Isaiah 7:14, there was actually a near fulfillment. This was designed to be a sign for King Ahaz from God that he would indeed protect the nation. And so I think what Isaiah did is he said, behold, the virgin, and I think he probably pointed to a young woman in the room who was not pregnant at the time, saying that she would give birth to a son. And then he goes on to describe the son. And by the time he's basically old enough to know right from wrong, the enemies that are coming against you, King Ahaz, will have dissipated. So there was a near fulfillment there for Ahaz, but there's also a far fulfillment relating to the Messiah. So that's a dual, an example of a dual fulfillment prophecy. We'll also see later in Daniel 11, when we get there, when you've got Antiochus Epiphanes and the future Antichrist. Again, Antiochus reigned over a section of the Grecian Empire from 175 BC to about 164 BC. And so there's some things that were fulfilled in his life, but some of those same things will also be fulfilled in the life of the future Antichrist, including the abomination of desolation. And so again, we'll kind of look at that as we go through those. But just as an introductory comment, sometimes the prophecy is given with this dual fulfillment. And so number 5, God used Nebuchadnezzar's dream to give us an outline of the kingdoms that will rule during the times of the Gentiles. Again, that's found in Luke 21, or the latter days. This is how Daniel speaks of it in Daniel 2:28. So if you recall Daniel 1 through 2 regarding Nebuchadnezzar, in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar first defeated Judah. And God began to allow Gentile nations at this point, one after the other, to dominate Israel and to build world empires. If you recall, Nebuchadnezzar's father was actually king, but when he died, Nebuchadnezzar went back and kind of finished the job on Judah. And that really started a chain reaction of what we know now today as the times of the Gentiles. That's when it started, when Nebuchadnezzar basically took charge of Babylon and took control of Jerusalem. In Jeremiah 33:15, because Israel habitually failed to follow God, she forfeited her rights to sovereignty as a nation. And so Israel will not regain complete sovereignty until the millennial kingdom, when the Messiah rules. So that's very important to understand, even in our world, in our day and age. But look at Jeremiah 33:15. It says this, and actually, let's go 14. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will perform that good thing which I have promised to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause to grow up to David a branch of righteousness, and he shall execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. Okay, and so this is, again, when a ruler is sent, Messiah is ruler, then Israel will regain her sovereignty. And not only that, but she as a nation will have sovereignty over the earth. And that's through the Messiah's reign and obviously his administration, of which believers will be a part of. We also learn in Psalm 89 that in fulfillment of the Davidic covenant, the King of Kings, Jesus Christ, will rule on earth forever as both King of the Jews and king of the world. And so let's look at that. Psalm 89, verse 26 and 27. Psalm 89, verse 26 and 27, which says this, and he shall cry to me, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. Also, I will make him my firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. Okay, and so then we see right following that is a repeat of the Davidic covenant. And so we're going to see that God is going to send the Messiah, King Jesus, to rule not only over the Jews, but also the entire earth. And this is, as Daniel 2 will tell us, this is the moment that he destroys all of the kingdoms on earth to establish the one from heaven. And so let's quickly review, before we get into Daniel 7 tonight, so we can make this connection. Let's quickly review Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2 and the 5 kingdoms mentioned there. We want to kind of explain those a little bit. And so in Daniel chapter 2, what we see is that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who had recently taken the southern nation of Judah into exile, was given a dream. And it was a dream of a large statue with different body parts made of different metals. And so let's just go ahead and read that section. It's a little bit longer section, but let's read that starting in verse 31. We'll go through verse 45. It says, you, O king, this is Daniel not only provided, if you recall this whole story, Daniel provided what the dream was. He also provided the interpretation. And he said, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Verse 43, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Verse 45, inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. And so when we look at this statue, the head of gold was Babylon. As the dream indicated, Babylon was the first empire prophesied to overshadow Israel. You might say that Babylon was the first empire in the times of the Gentiles. That's when the times of the Gentiles started, was with the Babylonian kingdom. And this head of gold represented Babylon's unsurpassed riches and power. In fact, history tells us that gold was so plentiful in Babylon that sometimes they just overlaid walls in gold. We also learn from history that these Babylonian kings, they were absolute monarchs. No one in their kingdom could counter their dictates. So they were very powerful. They had lots of control, especially from Nebuchadnezzar. It started going downhill, as we'll see, after Nebuchadnezzar died. But they were a very strong empire there for a number of years. And so the Babylonian Empire lasted from 605 to 539 BC. And as mentioned, the golden qualities began diminishing after Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562. It's also interesting, and we'll kind of come back to this at a study here in the future, but it's also interesting that all false religion was said to have officially begun at Babylon or at the Tower of Babel, and that Satan will actually headquarter the Antichrist kingdom in the future out of Babylon, believe it or not. So there's still a connection to Babylon in the future. Obviously, there's some chapters even in Revelation about the city of Babylon being destroyed. You know, Revelation 17 and 18 is largely about Babylon. So it'll come back into play, but obviously it was the head of gold. And then we got a second empire that jumped in, and that was the Medo-Persian Empire. And notice it was the chest and arms of silver. There's kind of a dual component aspect to this kingdom, the Medes and the Persians. And so we kind of I put the verses there that mention this joint kingdom, if you will. And so one of the things we learn about the Medo-Persian Empire is it lasted from 539 to 331 BC. So, 200 years versus the Babylonian kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar didn't even last 100 years. Okay. And so although Cyrus the Great of Persia was the first ruler of this kingdom, what we learn and what we saw, if you recall in Daniel chapter 6, is that he co-reigned for a couple of years with Darius the Mede. The Mede king, the king of the Medes was Darius, and he co-ruled with Cyrus the Great of Persia over Babylon. This is why he's brought up in Daniel chapter 6. And so the Chaldean, he reigned over the Chaldean region. Again, it was just a couple of years before he died. And so Persia, one of the things that we see about Persia from history is they were actually greater than Babylon in military might and also in the amount of territory conquered. But they were actually inferior in national cohesiveness. In a sense, they kind of grew too quick, and then they weren't able to administrate the amount of territory that they had conquered. And so, obviously, in Daniel 6, we kind of saw their plan to do that with the area of Babylon. It's a good plan, but I think they just were lacking human resources to get that cohesiveness going as a nation. But they did still last for 200 years. Now, one of the interesting things about silver is one of the things that history tells us is that silver money was actually used in the Persian Empire as a medium of exchange. And so that was kind of a descriptive of their empire. Now, the belly and thighs of bronze represented the Greek Empire, which again was the third empire to overshadow Israel, the third empire in this times of the Gentile. Now, what's interesting is that Greek rule impacted Israel directly from about 334 to 146 BC, and then it impacted indirectly through military harassment until about 63 BC. And so we'll talk a lot more about Greece because they're brought up a lot more in the prophetic portions of Daniel, as well as the Roman Empire. But that's 63 BC is when the Roman Empire came on the scene. And we're going to look at that military harassment because that's actually prophesied about in Daniel as well. So Alexander the Great obviously led them into this domination of the world. But after Alexander the Great overthrew the Persian Empire, he went on to continue to conquer the entire civilized world, traveling all the way to India. And so he was very successful in merging many culturally diverse nations. In fact, the goal of Alexander the Great and those with him was to Hellenize the entire known world. They wanted to make the entire world Greek speaking with Greek culture and customs. They felt like their culture was the best culture that anyone could ever have, and they were trying to implement that on the world. And so the Greek Empire was territorially larger than both the Babylonian and Persian empires, but again, they were weaker because of a somewhat more democratic government. You know, when you give people the chance to vote or voice their opinions, you get a lot more dissension and disagreement. And so I think they found that without being able to really convert people to their way of thinking, it became difficult to manage. And so we know that after Alexander died, it was an untimely death. I think he was 33 years old when he died. We know that the Greek Empire divided into 4 autonomous regions that often warred against each other. And so we'll kind of look at that. And again, this is brought out in Daniel, ironically, all this warring back and forth, especially between the northern Seleucid kingdom and the southern Ptolemaic kingdom, which was part of the Grecian rule when they had split up 4 different ways. Also of note, just kind of interesting, all the weapons in the Greek army were made primarily of bronze. And so you can see as God is giving this dream to Nebuchadnezzar, he's describing these kingdoms, but he's also describing some key components of these kingdoms, I believe, so that they can be recognizable. Now, the fourth and final human-led empire, represented by the legs of pure iron and the feet of iron mixed with clay, was the Roman Empire. And so although Rome, as a nation, if you will, was founded in 753 BC, they became a republic in 509 BC, it did not become a world empire until 27 BC. And so the Roman Empire became divided into 2 empires. Again, this is, I think, reflected in the legs that he mentioned there, the legs of iron. Right, you've got the Western Roman Empire, whose capital was Rome, and then you had the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, whose capital was Constantinople. The Western Empire lasted until about 476 AD when it was conquered by the Goths, and then the Eastern Roman Empire lasted until 453 AD when the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople. It was renamed Istanbul. Okay, and so Roman domination of Israel actually began in 63 BC when Pompey conquered Israel, and it continued well after the empire was divided into East and West. And so what's really interesting about this, and we'll kind of develop this more, but you've got in Daniel chapter 2, you've got this fourth empire, and it's comprised of these legs of iron, these 2 legs of iron. And then you have something very unique happen, because as the legs come into the feet changes substance. It's now a mixture of iron with ceramic clay. And we're going to look at that again in more detail as we go forward. But what it seems to reflect is a different phase of this Roman government. And I would say that we're in that phase of Roman government, that transition to the 10 toes right now. It's a phase of Roman government kind of mixed in with other governments. And when you look at human government on the earth today, you could rightly say that almost every human government is in some way or has in some way been influenced by the Roman Empire of old. And so again, we'll get into that in a lot more detail, but notice it seems like the Roman government, that fourth government that we're talking about, we've got the legs of steel, which is probably represented by this Western and Eastern Roman Empire. You can see how long they lasted. But then there's this transitionary stage into the feet, and then there's going to be a final stage of these 10 toes. And this is where Daniel 7 is going to help us as well. And then we got the final kingdom, kind of coming after the kingdom of the mixed materials and the toes and the feet. And it's described as a stone cut out of the mountain, made without hands. And this is the eternal kingdom of God. And so jumping ahead at his second coming, at the end of the tribulation period, the Lord Jesus will destroy all the kingdoms of men. And this will be so thorough that no remnant of sinful rule will remain. And we were kind of looking at in the Sunday school class this morning that the tribulation period is necessary as a means to destroy all of the kingdoms of men on earth. And Jesus is gonna kind of seal that final blow at the Battle of Armageddon in Revelation 19. Now, this cataclysmic act of God will destroy earthly human kingdoms forever. And so no element of the rule of sinful man will be absorbed, adapted, or blended into the millennial kingdom. It's going to be a brand new kingdom. God is going to usher in a kingdom that is nothing but righteous. And King Jesus is righteous, and his administrative staff, which are going to be Old Testament resurrected saints and church age saints and martyred saints during the tribulation, all in glorified bodies without a sin nature, will be his administrative staff. And so it's going to be a kingdom like no other. It's not going to be anywhere close or adopting any of man's elements, sinful man's elements of rule over others. And then letter C, the eternal kingdom established by the Lord Jesus Christ will be perfect in justice and the extreme contrast of all previous kingdoms ruled by sinful man. And as I mentioned, part of the reason for this is the administrative assistance that he has from all of the glorified saints from both Old Testament and church age. We won't have a sin nature. We'll do exactly what the king wants. No exceptions. We'll just be completely obedient. We won't even have the option to rebel because we'll be in our glorified body. Now, the question always becomes, well, who are they ruling over? Or who are the subjects of this kingdom? Well, it's going to be believing human beings. It's going to be saved human beings who lived during the tribulation, who survived the tribulation, and who now enter the kingdom still alive, and they're going to start producing offspring and start repopulating the earth. And those are going to be the subjects of the kingdom. So again, another question that often comes up, and in fact, when you talk to a Jewish person, is, obviously they believe the kingdom is eternal. But the question becomes for us, because we've been taught all of our Protestant lives that there's a millennial kingdom, there's a 1,000-year reign of Christ. So it begs the question, how could this kingdom in Daniel 2 be eternal and 1,000 years? And here's the reason. The 1,000-year reign will be a distinct time of Jesus Christ reigning on earth in Jerusalem, where everything that comes after this specific period will involve a new heaven and a new earth and a new eternal city, the New Jerusalem. And so, as I said, even in Sunday school this morning, a friend of mine says that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is the kickoff party to the eternal kingdom. There's just a season there where it's going to be on earth with glorified saints as the administrative staff ruling over human beings who are in human bodies with sin natures. And this is really the beginning phase of his eternal kingdom. And then after that, we move into the eternal state, Revelation 21 and 22. We've got a new heaven, a new earth, and a new eternal city. And Jesus Christ will continue to reign into eternity. And so that's kind of a quick overview and update on Daniel 2. And now we want to kind of turn to chapter 7. And we want to begin to realize the connections here between Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and now as we get into Daniel 7, because this is now Daniel's dream. And what we're going to see is that they're both describing the times of the Gentiles, but one is describing it from the perspective of Gentiles. What is their perspective of the times of the Gentiles? That's Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It's this beautiful statue, these incredible materials, right? It's like a glorious statue. But the perspective from the Jew is Daniel's dream. And they're going to see these empires as monsters and evil brutes. And so we'll see the perspective obviously changes there. And so number one, ancient empires had geographical and logistical limitations, but we now live in a time when global empires are within reach. Okay, so when we say a global empire or a world empire, and we're talking about Babylon, that's somewhat relative because it was over the known world. What this point is, what we're making, or the point that we're making with point number one, is that one day an actual global empire is within reach because of the technology, the lack of limitations that we have today that were not, or that were in place during this time. And so in this chapter 7, what we're going to learn is that an already existent evil empire, the Roman Empire, in its kind of mixed version, if you will, is going to one day gain global domination. And it will then divide into 10 regional governments. These are the feet and toes of iron and clay before becoming dominated by the Antichrist. And although this one world government could materialize in our lifetime, church age believers will exit the scene before the Antichrist takes control. So could this form of government come into play during our lifetime? I don't see why it couldn't. There's really not a timestamp on this, but rest assured that before the Antichrist takes control, which will be sometime during the tribulation, we believe the church will have been raptured before that. So we won't see that, but possibly we could see this form of government come into place before the rapture. We just don't know. It's just the timestamp's not really clear here. So the vision of this chapter, chapter 7, corresponds with Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, but it differs significantly in perspective. And this is what I was talking about earlier. The times of the Gentiles would be viewed differently by a pagan king and then a Jewish exile. And that's what we're going to see in Daniel 2 and 7. Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king, saw the emerging empires in terms of man's glory. He was standing upright. He was stately. He was majestic. Daniel, on the other hand, saw these emerging empires as beastly creatures of prey, devouring and destroying. And so we're going to look at that here in Daniel 7. And so whereas these empires were kind of appealing to Nebuchadnezzar, they seemed harsh, cruel, and evil to Daniel. Also, letter B, Nebuchadnezzar, a Gentile, saw human governments as passive, constituted of valuable metals. Daniel, a Jewish captive, saw human governments as menacing creatures, beasts to be dreaded. Letter C, Nebuchadnezzar saw a majestic statue of man in all his glory, viciously vandalized by a hurled stone. That's probably how he viewed it. Like, where's this? Who's throwing the stone at this beautiful statue, kind of deal. So it was viciously vandalized by a hurled stone. But conversely, Daniel saw a threatening beast destroyed by a glorious man, the Son of Man. Okay, so you see their different perspectives here. And so let's look now at Daniel's dream. Daniel 7, and let's just kind of read verses 1 through 8 here. Okay, we'll just kind of get the whole picture, and then we'll go back and look at this. So in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. Verse 6, After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. This beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And then after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And so let's start looking at these verses a little bit more closely. Verse 1, in terms of setting the stage, because we just came out of chapter 6, and Daniel's already in the Persian Empire in Daniel 6, but in Daniel 7, it actually takes us back in time before the events of chapters 5 and 6. In other words, Daniel's dream here happened, you can see in verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Okay, this is when his dream happened. So this is before chapter 5, before chapter 6, roughly 553 BC. Again, roughly, if we've got the time right, about 9 years after the death of Nebuchadnezzar and about 14 years before the fall of Babylon. So he gets this image. Again, remember in chapter 5, we read about the events of the night where the Babylonian Empire fell. Chapter 6, we read about Daniel's meteoric rise to prominence in the new Medo-Persian Empire and his betrayal and then subsequent deliverance from the den of lions. And so chapter 7, time frame wise, actually happened before chapters 5 and 6. And so in verse 2, as though in a movie, Daniel watched as the north, south, east, and west winds lunged downward and violently struck the waters. Now, the four winds here that stirred up the sea are possibly representative of demonic principalities that oversee the rise and dominion of these corrupt human empires. We learn later in Daniel 10, verse 20, that there is definitely some spiritual warfare going on behind these empires. Look at Daniel 10:20. Then he said, "Do you know why I have come to you?" This is the angel speaking to Daniel, and he says, "And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come." And I believe the angel there is fighting with demons who have been appointed over these nations. And so these four winds, as we see in verse 2, were probably representative of that, although we wouldn't, die on a hill in that identification. But sometimes in prophetic writings, the sea sometimes represents the multitudes of mankind. So this wind stirring up the sea, stirring up the multitudes of mankind, rising nations out of the sea, fits oftentimes with prophetic writings. And really the churning sea is just a great visual aid or picture of how pagan empires often come to life. They're very, it's very troubled water. There's a lot of war. They form great cyclones. They build great armies. They flatten everything in their path. So it's, there's definitely some imagery here that seems to, favor this interpretation, if you will, especially as to what comes. And so in Daniel 7, Daniel will explain how four important world empires would rise to dominate the earth and overshadow Israel until the arrival of the reign of Jesus Christ. And in verse 3, we learn that the four beasts that surface on the sea of humanity are simply empires that are personified by their respective kings. In fact, if you look down at verse 17, which we won't get to tonight, it says, "Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth." So these creatures that are coming out of the sea in Daniel's dream represent the kings of these empires. And so amazingly, what's incredible about these is the unique description given for each of these four beasts or kingdoms depicts characteristics that are also unique to their respective key leaders. And so in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar obviously personifies Babylon. There were more other kings, obviously his son and his grandson, but Nebuchadnezzar is the one who personifies Babylon. Cyrus personifies Persia. Alexander personifies Greece. And then finally, the little horn, who is the Antichrist, personifies Rome. Again, we're going to develop all this as we go, just kind of giving you a heads up of where we're going. And so the duration of these empires in history, they constitute the times of the Gentiles. And the times of the Gentiles will not terminate until the inauguration of the kingdom of heaven. And so in verse 4, we look at the Babylonian Empire. In Daniel's dream, the eagle-winged lion corresponds to Babylon, the head of gold in the statue of Daniel 2:38. I'm going to try in the notes to make the connection to the dream in Daniel 2, so you can go back if you wanted to and just continue to reference the fact that the two dreams, although dissimilar in ways, they're similar in terms of they're speaking about the same four nations. Okay. Babylon's winged lion was a multi-dimensional predator. In the bird kingdom, obviously the eagle dominates the skies, while the lion rules in the animal kingdom. So it spoke of great strength of this empire. And so having its wings torn off, if you remember in verse 4, it said that its wings were plucked off. And then afterward, they were lifted again, seems to refer to the humiliation and the subsequent restoration of King Nebuchadnezzar. And if you remember in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar found himself in a very embarrassing situation because he lost his senses. He was driven into the field and he lived like a wild animal for 7 years. And it was all due to his pride. He was taking credit for his kingdom. And he wasn't recognizing that the God of heaven was the one who gave him his kingdom, not his own human ingenuity. And so being allowed to stand up on 2 feet and given the ability to reason like a human is simply a reminder of Nebuchadnezzar's restoration to sanity and dominion. So we see that in verse 4. But in verse 5, it says another beast, a second one, arose. And this is the Persian Empire. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. In Daniel's dream, the arched bear here corresponds to the Medo-Persian Empire. And again, tying it to Daniel 2, it's the chest and arms of silver in the statue there. Now, bears are known for their power and their appetite. This animal aptly depicts Persia's great muscle and lust for domination. In fact, later in Daniel 8, Persia is portrayed as a ram butting in several different directions. Let's look at 8:3 through 4. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, again representative of Medo-Persia, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And that's a great description of the Medo-Persian Empire. And so this beast represents, again, the combined empires of the Medes and Persians. They controlled more territory than any empire up to that time in world history. So they took over the Babylonian kingdom and they expanded the territory that was governed by them. And so when we talk about the bear, it's interesting, this description. He was raised on one side, represents a single empire dominated primarily by Persia and secondarily by the Medes. In other words, one of the two kind of raised more to power. And that's exactly what happened in history. Persia became the primary ruler of that empire. Now, the ribs in its mouth, there was 3 of them, most likely represent the remains of 3 conquered kingdoms that constituted Persia. When you looked at the land that they had conquered, they were 3 large conquered kingdoms that they had incorporated. Cyrus had conquered and incorporated the Medes in 550 and then kind of brought them on as co-ruler. He conquered the Lydians in 546 and then he conquered the Babylonians in 539. And so we believe those 3 ribs really represented those 3 kingdoms that were kind of incorporated, if you will, into Persia. And so the command to the bear, as you'll see, it was at the end of verse 5, it says, arise and devour much flesh. And that's exactly what the Persians did. They gobbled up many countries and regions during their over 200-year reign. But then we move to verse 6 and we have a third kingdom. This is the Greek Empire rises. And in Daniel's dream, the 4-headed winged leopard corresponded to the Greek Empire. It's the belly and thighs of bronze in the statue in Daniel chapter 2. And when we look at the Greek Empire, the winged leopard represents the Greek Empire forged under the brilliance of Alexander the Great. Again, the leopard's not as powerful as a bear or as majestic as a lion, but it is fast. And when you add wings to a leopard, you have an animal that can attack at ballistic speeds. And the speed depicted by this animal emphasizes the rapid rise to power under Alexander's great prowess as a military commander. He conquered people at a rapid rate never seen before in the history of the world and never seen since. It was so unique. And yet here's this man, he dies at age 33, did all this before age 33, which is really incredible. Now, the text doesn't provide precise information about the 4 wings, but historically under Alexander the Great, Greece triumphed over the known world after winning 4 major conflicts in rapid succession. So that could be what the four wings refer to. But obviously the four heads, I think, a little bit more clear to understand. And you've got this, with four heads, you've got this extraordinary devouring machine. But one of the things we learned from history is after Alexander's death, the Greek Empire was divided between Alexander's four top generals. We're going to see this referenced again in Daniel 8, verse 8 and 22. This split into four, speaking of Alexander, speaking of the Grecian Empire here. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. Boy, that was a tongue twister there. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, four notable ones came up toward the four winds of heaven. And that's exactly how the Grecian Empire was split up: north, south, east, and west, with Alexander's top four generals. So we'll look at chapter 8 when we get there. Now, a quick comment before we just really briefly identify the Roman Empire, and then we're gonna call it a night. A quick glance at history shows that the prophecies of Daniel 7, 5 through 6 were fulfilled literally and with pinpoint precision. Very important to notice. Now, the fourth kingdom was a kingdom that would arise after the Greek Empire. This beast was the Roman Empire. Again, it was represented by the legs of iron and feet, partly of clay and partly of iron, in Daniel chapter 2. And we know that the Romans, with their iron weapons, tended to dominate wherever they went. Roman armies controlled the world for nearly 10 centuries, which is just incredible length of dominance. And so the iron teeth of the beast describes well Roman military dominance. Rome's armies would literally crush the enemy, killing thousands indiscriminately and subjecting the rest to slavery. And so this is the place, and we'll kind of pick up here next week. But this is the beast that caught Daniel's attention the most. This is the one he was interested in. He's going to ask questions about that one and get more details. And what's awesome about Daniel 7, it's actually going to give us more details about the mixed phase of that kingdom, the feet and the toes, and what that's going to look like. And so that's kind of the focus of Daniel 7 as we go forward. So I'm going to close there tonight. And let me just see if anyone's got, any comments or questions that I can help with. Did anybody miss a blank on the notes that I can help with, or anything like that? I'll give you a second to unmute. All right, clear as mud. Oh,
John.
Yeah, go ahead.
You almost made it.
Almost made it.
You almost made it. Hey, I just, one thing I wanted to ask you was, I had a question mark. Oh, you, on page 4, you said the duration of these empires in history constitute the times of the Gentiles, and then the times of the Gentiles will not terminate until the inauguration of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
I thought the end of the Gentiles was when the church was raptured.
No, because the end of the times. Yeah, good question. So the end of the times of the Gentiles is the Antichrist kingdom.
Got it.
At the end of the tribulation. And so that's where you go back to Daniel 2 and what destroys all of the kingdoms or the times of the Gentiles. It's the stone from heaven that's going to destroy, and that's the kingdom of Messiah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and one other thing, Shinar is mentioned many times in the Bible as being the location of the Tower of Babel.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, is Shinar where Babylon is going to raise back up, or does it really say anything about that?
I don't know. I would have to look at a map, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, I've got another question. Just one, a short one.
Okay.
The new heaven and the earth, I've heard you say this twice. So that's going to be after the 1,000-year reign.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
and one thing that is unique about the millennial kingdom is there's a time delay. And we're gonna look at this a little bit in Daniel, because this is where it comes out. There's a little bit of a time delay, because when Jesus comes back and destroys his enemies at the kingdom. There's going to be, I think, a 75-day interval before the start of the kingdom. And during that 75 days, I believe he restores the earth to almost Edenic-like conditions, because this is when the lion's going to lay down with the lamb. The curse in some levels is going to be, removed from the earth. I wouldn't say fully removed, because obviously he's going to do away with it and create something new. Yeah. But he is going to replenish it, restore it. It's going to be something like we've never seen before, the millennial kingdom, in terms of blessing. So that happens during that 75-day interval, as well as all of the judgments that have to go on during that time, like the sheep and goat judgments, etc. So,
yeah. Okay.
All right. Good question. Okay. Anybody else?
Pastor?
Yeah. Hey, Aldi.
On page 3, number 3, blank 2.
Okay.
Chapter 2, but it's blank significantly.
Okay, let me hold on one second. If anyone else has it, go ahead and speak up. I need to pull that up, because now I forgot. I'm looking at my PowerPoint, and I don't have that. All right, so let me look here. I'm pulling up that file. Number 3 on page 3.
Yeah, under transition and tie into chapter 7.
Okay, yep, number 3. And then did you say which letter?
The blank, under 3, blank 2.
Oh, okay, the vision of this chapter. Let's see if I can find it on my PowerPoint here now.
Corresponds.
Tie in. Okay, here we go. Yep, corresponds. And then the second blank is it differs.
I thought that's what it was.
Yep,
okay.
differs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, John, I got a question.
Yeah, hey, Rick.
Hey, you mentioned that Rome controlled the world for nearly 10 centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked at the previous kingdoms to see how long they ruled in relation to them? I was looking at our own country and how long they've been in a kingdom and or a government, or I guess a nation. And
yeah,
we've only been existent for over 2 centuries.
Right.
Just wondered if there was any relation to the time frames between the kingdoms, since Rome ruled for 10 centuries. I'm just wondering how many centuries the previous kingdoms reigned.
Yeah.
Any relation to maybe the future, the final kingdom, before Christ's kingdom, that is.
Yeah. Well, the Babylonian kingdom was less than 100 years. The Medo-Persian and the Grecian Empire were both around 200 years. So, yeah. So about the United States.
And the Greek, what was that? They were probably shorter, right?
No, they were a little over 200 years as well.
Oh, you said that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. Both of them were a little over 200 years. I think.
I'm just wondering if the span of the kingdoms increase exponentially with each one.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I think the thing that we'll get into is the Roman Empire, because a lot of people will say, well, the Roman Empire isn't in place today. But I think that's what's so beautiful about the prophecy in Daniel 2, is you've got the Roman Empire and the legs that were in existence. That's what we can observe in history. But now that iron has mixed in with other governments, and there's a Roman government influence, I think, that's spread to every government on earth, all the Gentile nations on earth. And then what's going to happen is when the Antichrist comes on the scene, there's going to be a 10 tiered, or not 10 tiered, but 10 separate regional rulers. We're going to look at that in Daniel 7, the 10 toes. And then he's going to take over that government. That's going to be his format for the world government. And that's the last phase of the Roman Empire. And not to get too ahead of ourselves, but this is why in Daniel 9, when it talks about the prince of the people to come, right? The people, it says in Daniel 9:26, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Well, we know who the people were, because that happened in 70 AD. That was the Romans. And so the prince is the Antichrist, and he's going to come out of that same empire and really finish the reign of the Roman Empire through that that conglomeration of 10 leaders. He's going to finish that reign, and then Jesus is actually going to destroy his empire. In fact, that's what it's kind of interesting in Daniel 2, because it says the rock is going to hit the toes. It's going to basically bust into the toes. Let's see. I'm trying to see. Where am I looking for? 40. Daniel 2:44. Is that what I'm thinking of? No, I saw that earlier. I think it's verse 34. Sorry, Daniel 2:34. You watch while a stone was cut without hands. And then it says, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. So that's the kingdom that Jesus is going to destroy, is the kingdom ruled by the Antichrist in its final form.
What I also find interesting about the 10 centuries that the Romans ruled over, that's about the same amount of time as Christ's kingdom, which I find.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's exactly, or at least the earthly component. Yeah, that's right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, good point. All right, anybody else? All right. Hey, let me close this with a word of prayer. Appreciate you guys coming out tonight and studying, and we'll just pick up where we left off next week. We'll finish these notes. So if you've already got them printed, you've got everything for next week. Same time next week, 4 to 5. I appreciate you adjusting that time for me as well. We'll just do that the next 2 weeks, and then we'll go back to our normal time. But let me just close this with a word of prayer. Lord, I do thank you for the study of your word. And again, as we mentioned in our Sunday school class, the study of end times prophecy is designed to have a very practical impact now in the way that we live our lives. So don't allow us to become just Bible study geeks without really taking this information and having it drive us back to you, desiring to fulfill your purposes in our life today. But we are so thankful for your word, so thankful for the confidence it gives us to watch you prophesy things that come to pass exactly the way that you predicted they would. And so we just rejoice that you are a truthful God, you're a faithful God, that you do exactly what you are going to say. So we're just so grateful for you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Great study.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mom. Guys, have a good night. Appreciate y'all for coming out.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yep.